going to be in Mark 10. No, we're not. I saw the number 10 on my page and just said Mark chapter 5. There are two really wonderful preachable stories. I like to say accounts because stories imply a certain fiction. And they really deserve their own message. We have an unusual number of people here today, and as I told Joanne when she was telling her sister-in-law what to expect today, that when there are more people here, I can preach longer. I'm going to write down a number that coincides with what I would report to the associations. Pleased to have 50 people here today. So the one account is of demons being driven out by Jesus, multiple demons in one person, and that really does deserve a lot of analysis and a lot of commentary. I'll see if I can get through it and then move on to another great story, a girl restored and a woman healed. This is, as you may remember, what some say is a Markan sandwich, because you've got Jesus headed out to do ministry for Jairus' 12-year-old daughter who's very ill. And then you have this interrupter where you have this little story about the woman with the issue of blood. And then you go back to finish out the story of Jairus' daughter. And so that's kind of an interesting way to narrate this account. So let's take a look at the demon situation. First of all, we remember Jesus is being pressed by the crowd. He gets on a boat, and he goes on the boat after stilling the storm. And then they go to the other side of the sea. Chapter 5, verse 1, book of Mark. They came to the other side of the sea, to the region of the Gerasenes. Now, I'll just stop and make a footnote here. Some of the skeptics will say there is no such place. Well, there are a lot of different terms or a lot of different places that are called the Gerasenes. My hometown is Rolla, Missouri. I did not realize until just a few weeks ago when I saw some report of some bad weather in Rolla, Kansas, that there was another Rolla, Missouri. There's a Springfield, I think, in every state. Does anybody have a town that you think is named in such a way that no other town is called that? Oh. That's probably one.
Asheboro. There is no other Asheboro in the U.S.
No other Asheboro. All right.
Walsenburg. Oh, yeah.
What now? Walsenburg? Yeah, probably not. Probably not. Kremlin? Yeah, that's probably me. But the case here is that there are a lot of places that are named something like this or get translated as something like this. So for those super skeptics that say, oh, that's not even a town, that's not even a place, it's not true. And there's archaeological evidence of this community. I think one thing that is of interest as we look at this account is that this region was not a region of Jews, it was a region of Gentiles. And so we see a little bit of a different pattern of the way that Jesus deals with the population than he did dealing with the Jews, with Pharisees and scribes and skeptics peppered in through that crowd. As soon as he got out of the boat, and remember Mark is uses these immediate words, the speed of this whole narrative is greater than most other accounts. A man with an unclean spirit came out of the tombs, and some people will say, what is this? Is an unclean spirit? What do some of your translations say?
Evil.
Okay, an evil spirit. I mean, it's very impure. It's very clearly demon possession. He lived in the tombs, and no one was able to restrain him anymore, not even with a chain. Now, it will be important in both this account and in the following account with the story of the healings that we remember that touching anything related to death made you unclean and you had to go through a purification process. So Jesus was willing to deal with somebody who lived in the cemetery. No one was able to restrain him anymore, not even with a chain, because he often had been bound with shackles and chains, but had torn the chains apart and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. This may be from the influence of the demons, but I will tell you, and I say this from experience, um, people can have one of these miraculous adrenaline dumps. My nephew, when he was, I think, probably 14-ish or so, uh, my brother was working under a car. And of course, if you grew up in the Ozarks, you know that we don't use hydraulic jacks. We use logs and concrete blocks and those kinds of things. So he was working on underneath the car, and whatever he was using for support, or all those old-fashioned bumper jacks, the car fell. And my nephew went over, lifted the car, and my brother was able to scoot his way out of there. And we've heard stories about that, superhuman strength. Another thing that limits our strength, we could do a lot more than we do in terms of our physical exertion if we felt no pain. We have a remarkable system in our body that lets us know when you have reached capacity. And if you go beyond that capacity, then you're going to break something. A bone's going to snap, a tendon's going to give way, your muscle's going to give way. But if you don't feel any of that pain, if you're not getting any of those signals, and that's why there's another sermon. I heard a testimony about a man whose son was born without the ability to feel pain, and he was always getting injured and never knew it. And of course, the moral of that story is that pain has its place in our lives, but that's not my sermon today. So this guy with superhuman strength. So it also says, night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. So self-mutilation, self-destruction, some of these things we see probably as a matter of satanic influence even today. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and knelt down before him. Now, he wasn't on the other side of the lake. How did he know that this was Jesus, who was somebody who had the capacity to relieve his torment? It could very well have been from that internal demon-possessed voice. He cried out with a loud voice, "What do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you before God, don't torment me." We might label this as the demon's prayer. Isn't that weird? And the relationship between the demons and Jesus and this poor innocent victim that's housing these demons is really interesting, and I can't totally explain it. But the demons and Satan himself is very, very aware of who God is. What the limits of their power are is because of the Lord, and who Jesus is. Son of the Most High God, you can't have a greater title or appellation than Son of the Most High God. So these demons know exactly who they're talking to. I beg you before God, don't torment me. So I'm not going to go into a whole lot of demonology because I would not pretend to be an expert in it. But there are some demons who are already disabled and locked in a pit somewhere in the universe. Um, and every demon, apparently, every demon that we have uh, seen express this kind of thought, knows that their time is limited. And there will be a day when their service to Satan will be ended and over and finished, and they will be confined forever. And they don't want that time to happen any sooner than it has to. Don't torment me. For he had told him, come out of the man, you unclean spirit. And then Jesus said, what is your name? My name is Legion. And you all know, if you've heard this sermon before from somebody, a legion is a Roman military force of up to 6,000 people. So does that mean there were 6,000 demons? We don't know. That may be. One thing about demons is that they share with Satan himself is that they like to lie, right? And so if they're trying to puff themselves up in this, how many of our demons were in there, they might want to say, I got 6,000 demons backing me up, so there you go. And so we don't know if there were 6,000, but there were many. And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the region. Demons have assignments just like angels do, because they're fallen angels. And their assignments are to lie and to destroy, to try to ruin the credibility of the gospel, to mock God, to make things look bad for God. And we see this at work here. And so they were not done with their mission. And they said, let us stay because we've got things to do. A large herd of pigs was there feeding on the hillside. And this is a mystery I can't fully explain. The demons begged him, send us to the pigs so that we may enter them. Now, why would they make this request and why would Jesus grant it? A couple of theories. One is that the demons wanted to create as much trouble to be laid at Jesus' feet that they could. They want to discredit Jesus. And we see when this herd of pigs was destroyed that it caused a lot of consternation in that local community. And so that might have been a strategy. Some people say, well, that's not fair to that poor pig farmer to lose 2,000 head of livestock. And we don't know how those livestock were obtained. You know, maybe it was an honest pig farmer, again, this Gentile area. And it could be very just that he lost their dishonest, ill-gotten gain. Another theory about demons is they have to have a host, that they can't just float around. And I don't know that that's true because it's not true of angels. But they do like to abide in spaces, right? So to go into the pigs would keep them out of circulation. Remember, the scripture also says, what good does it do to get rid of a demon and not have a change in your life? If you don't get filled with the Holy Spirit, if Jesus is not abiding, then there's a vacuum there. So you could be healed and be an ingrate about it. You could have a deliverance of a demon and not give God the glory, not accept Christ, and so still have an empty vessel. So if these demons would have been released from this one guy that they wanted to torment for whatever purpose, then it might have been the end of a lot of people. I do want to make a note, as I try to always do when we talk about these things. If Jesus is in your heart, there is a no vacancy sign. And a Christian cannot be possessed. Now, can they be tormented? Yes. Can they be tempted? Yes. Can they be assaulted? Yes. I had a friend who said that he envisioned And I can't, it was Jerry. It was Jerry. I won't say his last name in case he's watching, because I'm not sure I believed it. But he said he had a vision or read of somebody that had a vision of somebody was walking down the street and you could see the demons attacking him. You could see the spiritual scars. Um, and we get into some areas where we're kind of hesitant to talk about weird stuff like the supernatural and about demons attacking us and about spiritual warfare. But friends, remember that our battle is not against flesh and blood. So there are some things in the heavenlies, in the invisible world around us that we don't see, we don't understand, we can't see coming. But the Christian is safe from demon possession. Now, are we safe from mental illness? Are we safe from self-destructive thoughts? Are we safe from making stupid decisions? No, we are not. Um, and there are many Christians that struggle with mental illness. And by the way, mental illness, physical illness, demon possession, and sin to cause physical illness are separate categories. Now, sometimes the vulnerability might make us more subject to demon influence. And I will also remind us that the devil is not omnipresent. He doesn't know everything that's going on everywhere. And the one thing he does know after watching thousands of years of human behavior, he's got a pretty good guess about how you're going to react and what bothers you and what's going to be a stumbling block to you. So those are the tools that he uses. So off to the pigs they go. And I'm not going to make the devil-hammed jokes. I've seen that too frequently. Gave him permission. Now, the herd of about 2,000 rushed down to the steep bank into the sea and drowned there. I wonder if the demons were like, hey, 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 I didn't know this was going to happen. The men who tended them ran off. So there were other people there to witness that. In fact, in Matthew and perhaps another gospel, maybe in Luke, there was a mention of 2 people in the tomb. But Mark's just telling the story of one. It doesn't mean that these accounts are wrong. The men who tended them ran off and reported it in the town and countryside, and people went to see what happened. Jesus always drew a crowd, didn't he? They came to Jesus and saw a man who had been demon possessed sitting there dressed and in his right mind. The implication they usually ran around naked or in ragged clothing. And they were afraid. Now, if I had written this story, I would have said, they saw the man demon possessed sitting there dressed in his right mind and were very grateful and thanked God for this man's deliverance, who was no longer going to be a threat to the community. But no, they were afraid. We see this again and again. When you come in contact with the great power of God manifested on this planet, you are bowed down in fear. Those who had seen it described to them what had happened and the demon-possessed man, and they told about the pigs. Then they began to beg him to leave the region. Thanks for coming, Doc. Can we get your one-way ticket out? And he was getting into the boat. The man who had been demon-possessed begged him earnestly that he might remain with them. Well, sure. He'd had a terrible experience in this community. Terrible experience. Nobody had tried to exercise any compassion to him. All they tried to do is bind him up and keep him in the graveyard. And Jesus cared for him, healed him, delivered him. And Jesus did not let him. Now look at the contrast here. Oftentimes we see Jesus saying, come follow me. He says, no, stay. Go home to your own people and report to them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. We talked a lot already in the first 4 chapters about the Messianic secret. He delivered so many people, he healed people, and he would say, don't tell anybody. Just go get blessed by the priest and go on about your life. But here in this Gentile community where the gospel had not been being heard, Jesus said, I need you to tell your story about deliverance and to spread the gospel, the reality that this man you met is man from God, and be my missionary here in this pagan part of the country. So he went out and began to proclaim in the Decapolis, an area of 10 cities, how much Jesus had done for him, and they were all amazed. So what Jesus did was so overpowering and scary that they wanted Jesus to leave. But when they heard the story about the man who had received the great blessing and healing from Jesus, they listened to him. They wanted to hear his story. I often pray, Lord, would your Holy Spirit please convict that person? But, and certainly that's a prayer that can be answered. But the voice of God himself perhaps can be more easily rejected than the witness of someone who has experienced and responded to the voice of God. So what I'm saying, obviously, is this is a call to evangelism, a call to share your story, because that may be the most powerful way that the gospel is shared. Now, you don't have to have this dramatic of a testimony. But I'm not going to ask you how many have done it, but how many of you have heard the advice that you need to be able to give your testimony in like 2 minutes? Anybody ever heard that counsel? In the sales world, they say, they call it an elevator pitch. If you were in the elevator with a potential customer and you had 2 minutes to get to the top floor and you were in the elevator together, what would you say in 2 minutes that would convince somebody to sell something? So we ought to know what our testimony is. It doesn't have to be terribly dramatic. As you remember, I grew up in the 70s, and the best testimonies came from former drug addicts. And we all kind of felt like we were left out. I mean, never been to jail, never been a drug addict. You know, what's my testimony? So you need to know what it is, because that's very powerful. Well, I won't give, I don't think I can give, can you guys hang with me for another 10 minutes? I don't know what Jordan's done, but she might need another 10 minutes, or she might be watching the clock. I just want to make a quick point about the girl restored, the woman healed. See if I can tell it quicker than reading. So Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side. A large crowd gathered around him. One of the synagogue leaders named Jairus. Now, Jairus was a bit of a top-tier guy in the Jewish community. I'm not sure what his complete role was in the synagogue, but he was one of the leaders. And when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet, begged him earnestly. And can you imagine the other synagogue goers and maybe some of the Pharisees watching Jairus grovel before this blasphemous rebel, Jesus? So Jairus was willing to give up his whole reputation in the community. When he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, my little daughter is dying. Come and lay your hands on her so that she can get well and live. So Jesus went with him. He was going to do this. Large crowd was following and pressing him around. So meanwhile, cut to scene 2. A woman suffering from bleeding for 12 years had endured much under many doctors. She had spent everything she had and nothing was helped at all. On the contrary, she became worse. Having heard about Jesus, she came up behind the crowd, touched his clothing, for she said, if I just touch his clothes, I'll be made well. And instantly her flow of blood ceased, and she sensed in her body that she was healed of her affliction. A couple of things about this woman. First of all, she was a woman. Don't be touching Jesus. Secondly, she was impure because of her flow of blood. And she was She was diseased in a way that required her to stay away from everybody. And so she was outcast. She couldn't go to the temple, couldn't go to the synagogue, couldn't worship with others, always had to stay away from people. Um, and so she was an untouchable. Um, and I don't want to get too much into biology here today, but um, we assume that her flow of blood was a dysfunction of her reproductive system. Um, and even during those times, for women, they were to stay away from everybody, and the men were supposed to stay away from them as well. Let me tell you why I think that is. Um, if an egg inside the woman does not get fertilized within the creative cycle, then what happens to it? It dies. So you were not to touch anything that had been touched by death. And you were not to touch anything related to blood. I'll go a little bit further back to say that our whole reproductive process um, is part of the image of God as being a creator of life. And so it is much more sacred than we really accept, and certainly more sacred than that we accept in our current culture. So these oppressive, misogynistic, patriarchal rules that people rail about back in the Old Testament, they were all built around the sacredness of the possibility of creating a life between a man and a woman. And so that all of those moral things that we talk about are centered around the sacredness of the gift of the creative possibility that is part of the image of God. Does that make sense? I will also say, as we have been reading through the Old Testament, I actually, for some reason, I was reading Malachi, and then I decided, well, I'll go backwards. So I'm going backwards through the Old Testament, which is kind of interesting. But I was reading in the book of Ezekiel about the rules for the priest. This is in the priestly duties and worship. This is in Ezekiel 44, and I just happened to run across this verse while I was studying this other event. Before they go out to the outer court to the people, they, being the priests, must take off the clothes they have been ministering in, leave them in the holy chambers, and dress in other clothes, so that they do not transmit holiness to the people through their clothes. Think about the difference between the incarnate Jesus walking among the filthy crowds, touching diseased people, outcast people, even when he gets to Jairus' daughter who's 12, but that's the age of womanhood in the Jewish world, touching someone he knew to be dead. So he is violating all kinds of holiness rules. The point being that there was a time in the history of Christianity, I'm talking Old Testament, where God would not trust any element of holiness to the people. The priests had to be holy, they had to be prepared, the clothing had to be holy, and one of the reasons they couldn't wear their holy clothes out in public was that the holiness might have been transmitted. Now, this was a God who dwelled in the temple. Part of their holiness might basically be trampled on by people who couldn't handle holiness. And so the great separation between the unclean human population and the holiness of the presence of God, which we don't have the ability to even comprehend, the holiness of God. That was what was broken in the incarnation. When Jesus came, he said, I'm going to bring the holiness of my Father into the world that my creatures live in. And I'm going to touch dead people. I'm going to touch bloody people. I'm going to touch diseased people. And then for these people, I will go to the cross and suffer this forbidden thing, which is blood and death, as a sacrifice for their unholiness. And I will make them righteous so that they come into the presence of a holy God. There's a lot more details about this story, but that's the real point I wanted us to be reminded of, is that if you're filthy, you're diseased, you're unrighteous, you're sick, you're demon possessed, you can touch the holiness of God through Christ. And that is the ultimate source of our life, our gratitude, and all the things that we do in His name. Let's pray.